Well, good evening, everyone. Don't adjust your cameras, don't adjust your YouTube. Obviously, I am not the Ghost of Sparta. I am Mr. Bennett filling in for the Ghost of Sparta tonight. First of all, I want to say thank you to Peter, the Ghost of Sparta, for Grooming and Reviews 101 for allowing me to share this platform tonight. Good to be with you guys here on the Saturday night for another edition of the Hangout. And again, grooming ass that I fill in for this evening, and so certainly it's my privilege to do so. And just going over topics, what can I fill this in? Obviously, this is the Hangout, so again, we're not here trying to be serious. We try to talk about lighthearted things, about fun activities and whatnot. And so we were just mulling over some ideas. And one thing that I am known for, I am a big Godzilla fan. So figure for tonight that we would certainly spend some time talking about Godzilla and the Godzilla franchise again. But before I begin, again, thank you guys all for coming. And again, if you see at the bottom of your screen here, certainly if you like the content of what we're going tonight, again, none of this goes to me, but certainly Grooming Reviews 101, you can certainly drop him a cash app. Certainly that would support his efforts in terms of trying to bring content. And also, but click the like button when you come into come in tonight. Hopefully we'll have some guests who want to come through, and then we'll also try to get you guys on if you guys want to sort of join the conversation. But again, I'm here to talk about Godzilla, or as the Japanese say, Godzilla. And so again, ever since I was pretty much as young as I can remember, I've always been into like monster films from back in the day. So, from the American side, you had like Beast from 20,000 Phantoms, you had them, you had the Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, you had, the Wolfman and Dracula and Frankenstein and all that. But really what set it apart for me was the Godzilla series. And I might have been 6, 7 years old the first time I saw a Godzilla film. And that was the film with Raymond Burr. So again, Godzilla started. The first film came out in 1954. It was founded by two guys, one Ishiro Honda and E.G. Tsuburaya. Where they were the co-creators of the Godzilla franchise, of the character. And certainly there were some major incidents that went into the creation of the monster. I mean, obviously, Ishiro Honda, he's been as a director in film since the late 30s, early 40s. And certainly, with a lot of the events that were going on in Japan at the time, obviously they had lost World War II, and certainly that rebuild of the country. You also had the atomic bomb tests that were going on in the South Pacific at the time. And one incident in particular was the Lucky Dragon 5. So there was this boat that was exposed to radiation from nuclear tests that certainly garnered big news at the time. So in there trying to create this series or this character, the theme for this film, they thought about trying to draw on some of Japan's misery at the time, and just the consequences of man's actions in general when it comes to exposure to its own follies. Again, we open up certainly a can of worms with the creation of the atomic bombs, or the discovery of nuclear energy, which we're still dealing with today. I mean, certainly last year you had the film Oppenheimer came out, which is a great film that talked about the the creation of the Manhattan Project, everything that went into the creation of the bomb. And obviously, we had the only two bombs ever deployed were certainly on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 1945, August of 1945, and that brought a swift end. I mean, the war was kind of teetering towards the American and Allied forces anyway, but certainly the Japanese, they were in no condition to surrender, or they were not willing to surrender. So the bombings helped to expedite the end of the war. And honestly, just as from stat, I mean, certainly there was more damage done to Japan through just fire bombings. The Tokyo bombings certainly deleted more people overall as a total number, but certainly the swift destruction that was done at the time certainly led to it. But even people still talk about it today. Should we have dropped the bombs or not? Should they just been attested? All those things kind of go into it. But a lot of that mindset went into the creation of the character. So Godzilla, so one of the questions that was asked of me tonight is, again, what was the original inspiration? Again, the end of World War II and Japan's defeat. the atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the subsequent nuclear bomb tests that went into that wound up victim of that being the Lucky Dragon 5 boat. Certainly those are things that certainly signaled the creation, of they built stories around that. And there's also been some conjecture that some of the creation was about really Godzilla. What he represents is the United States, in that here you have Japan. Obviously, they did the sneak attack, Pearl Harbor, and that brought certainly the Americans into World War II. And so basically everything that happened to Japan after that was sort of retribution by the Americans regarding the destruction of Japan. So some have opined that Godzilla is pretty much an American response to the actions of Japan. And so, and subsequent films have dealt with different levels of Japanese responsibility for a lot of those incidents. So, so certainly, it's been a major franchise. I mean, on this show, we've talked about the Star Wars franchise. We've talked about the Star Trek franchise. We've talked about the James Bond franchise. You can make an argument that certainly got the Godzilla franchise is the one that is most enduring, certainly over the years. I mean, you're talking 70 years that the Godzilla franchise has been around, longer than James Bond, longer than Star Trek, certainly longer than Star Wars. That it's one of the most enduring franchises. It's one of the most titular characters of fictional characters of all time. I mean, you think about Darth Vader and pick any character you want. But I think Godzilla has worldwide recognition, world wide ID, and now with certainly even to just this past year, certainly with the releases of obviously Godzilla X Kong and certainly Godzilla -1, which was the Toho production, Godzilla's as popular as ever. And so, certainly kudos to those two men who came up with the creation of this character, and then certainly its enduring history, certainly over time. And it certainly stood the test of time. Certainly, as far as the name Godzilla, now again, this has also been a point of conjecture. There's different stories have been told. One was that Godzilla is actually a combination of two names. One is Gorira, which was Japanese for a gorilla, and Kujira, which means whale. So Godzilla is or Gojira is supposed to be a combination of whale and gorilla, and so they kind of came up with that name. And so so again, it's titular. So whether you say Godzilla or Gojira, it's definitely a name that is certainly etched in a lot of our minds. And again, as we see my background tonight, there's been a lot of incarnations, just like there have been different James Bonds over the years, and just different characters that have been certainly repackaged. There have been a lot of different characters over the years, a lot of different costumes of the characters. Seems like every movie seems to change the costume to something else. It's almost like it kind of goes with the series, or even if it is the same base costume or the same these days, everything is done in CGI. They certainly make a point of making sure that that they do some sort of modification to the costume. It could be a big change, it could be a subtle change, but they've always done something to the costume to make it more distinct from different movies. Even if the same suit is essentially used, you can tell if you look closely enough that they make some subtle changes to it that you can certainly pick up. So I don't think there's ever been the same costume used twice in any different Godzilla film. So one of the other questions I've been asked is, again, how has the depiction of Godzilla changed over time? That's a difficult question to answer because there have been at least 4 different well, actually there's been I would say there's been 5 different versions of Godzilla over the years. Okay, there's been about 38 films in total that have been created, including some animated series and shorts that have been done over time. And each series sort of evolves the character over that time, and then a lot of times they'll do a reset. So you're not going to have, like, from 1954 to 1974, you're not going to have a steady evolution of the character. Sometimes there's a reboot, sometimes there's a change in direction, and very few of the films are considered sequels. It's like a James Bond film. Most, a lot of those films tend to have a similar sequences. The only thing with the James Bond would be, I guess, the Daniel Craig series. You can say that it's been sort of a series of sequels because they all followed that Spectre, the formation of Spectre and everything that was going under it. So they tried to kind of blend all those films together. But it's hard to do that with the Godzilla franchise. So he's been everything from a terror, a monster, which was, again, the initial inspiration is that he was a reminder to the Japanese people the the nuclear bombs, the nuclear weapons that were dropped on the country. He means death and destruction to people. He's been a hero. He's been an anti-hero. He's been just so many different carnations. Also, the different audience that he's played up to. So again, the initial movies, he would play, like, again, very seriously, a terror. You were supposed to be terrified of him. But in later movies, he became like a friend to children. It was almost like you were watching Power Rangers or something like that. So they made him, a friend to children and whatnot. And they made him funny. They gave him dance moves. They gave him, boxing moves. The 1-2, he jumped up and down and being victorious. So it kind of got silly over time. And I'm not going to say that I've certainly appreciated every Godzilla film. I certainly there's some that I can take and leave, and so certainly but as far as the 5 eras really that you're talking about, the first era is called the Showa era. That was from 1954, which includes the original film, through 1975. So there were 15 Godzilla films made over that period. Now, as a subtext to that, there was also the American entry. So all of these movies made their way to America. But there are a couple of exceptions that I found were noteworthy. The first one was, and this is, again, the first Godzilla movie I ever saw, was Godzilla King of the Monsters, which was certainly based on Godzilla 1954. But the way they did it was they built the story around an American character. Well, actually, he's Canadian, Raymond Burr, a Canadian actor, but playing an American reporter, Steve Rogers. He was going flying to Japan as these things happen. So the story is told through his perspective about Godzilla, the discovery of Godzilla, his destruction of the city and whatnot, and the efforts of the country to get rid of him. Everything was told through his eyes. And so, but as a kid, you didn't know that they never showed you the original 54 Godzilla. In fact, it might have been like at least 50 years later before I even knew about the original 1954 and got a chance to see the original 1954 Godzilla. In fact, I have the DVD of the original 1954 with English subtitles. It's in full Japanese, and it's got the subtitles and everything. But for so long, nobody knew. So we thought that the Raymond Burr version, the 1956 Godzilla King of the Monsters, was the original Godzilla. And so, for us growing up, it was that was where everything started. So we based everything else on that. Now the story is a little bit different. I think they did a decent job in preserving, I think, the heart of what the original Godzilla was trying to convey. But certainly there were things about, certainly the people and how they looked at their situation, what was the morale of the Japanese people. Again, they're still less than 10 years removed from the defeat of World War II, and just people just trying to rebuild their lives or whatnot. So there were a lot of subtleties that they added to the 54 film that gave you a different perspective. But I thought they did a fairly decent job, even though they made Raymond Burr's character the center of the movie. I still think they did a decent job of preserving the general flow of the film. They didn't take, I've seen worse, where they take drastic moves with the movie. So the 1956 Godzilla King of the Monsters. If you're in America, then more than likely that's probably the first Godzilla movie you ever saw. Unless you're maybe a younger person, like 21 and younger or whatever, you might have had a chance to see the 54 version, especially with the Godzilla -1. That definitely paid a big homage to the 54 film. It had that same kind of feel to it. In fact, they even did a re-release a few months ago of the -1 film, but they shot it in black and white. So again, the first 2 Godzilla movies, they were shot in black and white. And so they even, with the -1, they even made a black and white version of it. So the Showa series, again, 1954 to 1975, Godzilla, King of the Monsters, 56, and subsequently also in that it's just outside the era, but something happened uniquely in 1977. So two things happened. One, Toho Studios, which is responsible for all of the Japanese Godzilla movies, they franchised out the character of Godzilla in the late 70s. And when they did that, that led to a couple of spin-offs on the character. The first licensing was to actually Marvel Comics. So in 1978, there was a series of Godzilla comics. It might have been 15, 20 issues of the Godzilla comic book series from that era. In fact, if you look at my background, if you check, let's see if I can do this right. If you check right there, this guy right here, this guy is from the comic book, the Marvel comic book, released those issues in 1978 and I think through 1979. So again, if you go back and look it up, Marvel Comics Godzilla, you will see a lot of those issues referred to. And I remember reading those when I was a kid growing up. So that was one of the first exports. The second one, which is also in the frame, if I go up a little bit here, this guy right here. So again, for you OGs, all right, a lot of you guys aren't going to remember this, but there was a theme song, Up from the Depths, 30 stories high, breeze, fire, he stands in the sky, Godzilla. So NBC got licensed and they did their own Godzilla cartoon series on Saturday mornings back in 1978. So you had Godzilla and he was basically, working with this research team, and you had this baby Godzilla that fly. They call him Godzuki. Again, you got to make it for the kids. So I didn't care for that too much, but hey, you're a kid itself, and I'm 10 years old, so who cares? It's still Godzilla, right? So it was still cool at the time. And then what was also done in that, there was also a series of toys that came out in that time. So they had this Shogun Warrior toy line that came out. So it was kind of these Japanese-based Shogun type of action figures and heroes. I think they did some animated series of comics with those guys as well. And they even had a Godzilla action figure. Okay, and this was all out in the late 70s. So certainly very memorable during that time. Those 15 movies from 54 to 75, I got to tell you honestly, really I would say after Ghidorah the three-headed well, really I would say after uh Ghidorah the three-headed monster, it got silly after that. I mean, at that point, so up to that point, Godzilla was considered a villain. So Godzilla versus Mothra, which is certainly one of my favorite suits. Again, like I said earlier, every Godzilla film essentially had a different suit. If you look subtly enough, you can see the differences from suit to suit. The Godzilla versus Mothra, that was 1964, is my favorite suit of that era, and certainly in my top 5 suits of all time when it comes to Godzilla. So again, but he was a villain. The first movie, he was like a force of nature. Like it wasn't like he was, uh, um, you know, intentional about, okay, I just want to, eat people or destroy. He was just like an uncontrollable force. I mean, he had no emotion or whatever. Nobody understood what he did, why he did it. But he was like a hurricane. He was like, it's just like, how do we deal with this thing? In the later parts, like when Mothra was 64, he was definitely a lot more villainous, certainly in those films. But then they did a turn with after Ghidorah the three-headed monster, they did, if using wrestling analogy, they did a face turn. Okay, so Ghidorah obviously was this monster from outer space. He had 3 heads, and certainly Godzilla, and also subsequent to that, it's also one of the questions what effect did Godzilla have on the creation of other monster movies. I mean, it was big. I mean, they had other kaiju, which is certainly the name for the genre of monster movies or monster based movies, Japanese monster movies in general, the kaiju series. So out of that also came Rodan. Okay, the flying pterodactyl kind of monster, Mothra, the butterfly type of monster, Baran the unbelievable, and the gargantuas, and so there was a series of Baragon. There was a series of monsters that were created, Anguirus, that were created in this time that were either opponents of Godzilla or they were friends or they sort of fought with Godzilla. So again, at the time, certainly both Rodan and Godzilla were, certainly, antagonists in the movies, and but with Ghidorah the three-headed monster, they kind of had to team up. All right, so this was the first time where I guess both Godzilla and Rodan made a face turn to fight King Ghidorah off, and from that period onwards, basically they were good guys for the remainder of the Showa series. So up and through 1975, Godzilla was essentially a good guy. One of the big movies that led to that really brought it all together was all these monsters that were created in this time. 1968, there was a movie. It was called Destroy All Monsters, at least the English version. I'm not going to give you all the Japanese names of all these movies, just not to confuse people. But there was a movie, Destroy All Monsters, which was basically a battle royal. So Ghidorah was never quite, or Ghidorah was never quite defeated. They always kind of fended him off, and he sort of flew off, and he came back bigger and badder than ever, or something like that. And so he basically came back, and basically there was a battle royal. So you had Rodan and Anguirus and Gargantuan, like all these monsters sort of came together to fight King Ghidorah off. And so again, that's that point. The movies almost became like, again, what we see now with the Power Rangers, and you have these alien monsters, and the robot monster, something tries to fight people off, and all those kind of things. So so certainly at that time it definitely became more comedy. Godzilla being the good guy, and he's fighting off all these evil invading monsters or alien forces that are coming to invade the earth. So he was like almost like a protector of the earth at that point. And a lot of times he would have to team up with somebody. So Godzilla versus Gigan came out in 73. He teamed up actually with an android called Jet Jaguar, and they had to fight off Gigan and Megalon, and so again, they were like tag team battle royals. It kind of got silly with the movements and everything, but again, they changed their focus, where not only was he a good guy, but also they wanted to appeal to children. And so, so that was a major angle. So again, when you're a kid watching this stuff, you're like, okay, this is cool. But once you get up of age or whatever, it's like, yeah, this is kind of silly at this point. Like I said, you got Godzilla doing Ali shuffle and dance moves and things like that. I mean, they really made it, drop kicks and, and things like that. So they really kind of made it kind of silly at that point. But again, it was fun while it lasted. But again, clearly out of that series, the big movies was the Gojira 54, Godzilla King of the Monsters in 56, and then um, I would definitely put in there King Kong versus Godzilla, Godzilla versus Mothra. Clearly the best movies of that era, and I think they still maintain the seriousness of Godzilla being a villainous monster. But there were other monsters that sort of came to the floor that certainly made him more the protector or the anti-hero at that particular time. So that's the Showa era. It has the most films to it. It has several spin-offs, like I said, with the cartoons and the comic books and the toy lines and whatnot that came out in the late 70s. Certainly a big homage to that. Then they took a hiatus for about 16 years. So really, actually, almost 20 years, actually. So in 1984, they brought Godzilla back. It was called The Return of Godzilla. That was the Japanese title. But then in the US, they called it Godzilla 1985. And what they did was they actually borrowed from the same formula that they did in 1956 with Godzilla King of the Monsters. So they brought Raymond Burr back to resume his role as Steve Rogers, the reporter. But this time he's sort of in a consultant role, sort of advising the government on how to deal with the monster and everything. So again, they made some changes to the story, but there was light connections to the 54 movie, but not really. I mean, basically, it's like they thought they killed him off in the 54 or the 56 movie, but somehow he comes back. I don't know, he regenerates or something. That's also one of his powers. He, if you're gonna take Godzilla out, you got to take all of them out. He's like Deadpool or Wolverine or something. You got to get every microbe of the guy. Otherwise, he's just going to regenerate. He had crazy regeneration powers and whatnot. So he might be defeated, but they always seem to find a way to bring him back. And so 1984, Godzilla came out. And, to somewhat, certainly the 85 movie really didn't do that well here in the country because it was like, this kind of same stuff we remember seeing in the 70s, the guy in the suit and everything and some of the special effects and whatnot. I mean, cleaned up for sure, but certainly not as big. But move 5 years later, so we're still in the Heisei series. 7 films made in the Heisei series. The one that really was a game changer was Godzilla versus Biollante, and that was in 1989. And in there, again, a totally different Godzilla design that was basically the base design for the remainder of the series. Again, they made small tweaks here. They made change his body proportions. They made the head smaller. Certainly over the course of the series, certainly the last one in that series, Godzilla versus Destroyer, they made him sort of molten, like glowing, because he was kind of overheating. I mean, one thing about because he's sort of nuclear power, he's like literally like a nuclear power plant, and certainly certainly always the danger of him having a meltdown, and certainly that was sort of actualized in that particular film. But certainly the design, which was certainly iconic in its nature. In fact, the design is actually this guy right here, right to my upper right here. That's kind of the main design, and like I said, they've done small modifications to it over time, changed his eye color and whatnot. They gave him brown eyes. He looked very animalistic. He looked very muscular. He looked and I thought the special effects that they used at the time, I thought they were very good. And certainly was an upgrade. So again, you had Godzilla versus Biollante, but again, the big movie that really came was the follow-up was Godzilla versus King Ghidorah. So they brought Ghidorah back, okay, and they had a totally revamped story in terms of how Godzilla was created and how they basically went back in time trying to end his creation in general, but they wound up creating another. He got created anyway, so it's like the purpose of the movie was, yeah, you can try to stop things from happening, but things still seem to happen anyway. So he got created one way or the other. In fact, they need to actually bring him back so he can fight off King Ghidorah because But again, certainly a very popular film at the time, and really it might have been the biggest in the Heisei series at the time. And then they had other films, Godzilla versus Mothra. They had a Godzilla versus Mecha Godzilla, Space Godzilla. Like I said, Destroyer was certainly the last one in that series. And then they took another break. So again, from uh, um, up from 84 to 95, you had those 7 films. They take another break. Now, in the meantime, again, there was another licensing of the Godzilla franchise to TriStar Pictures, and in 1998, they made their own Godzilla movie, which didn't do that well. I'll just put it mildly. There was a lot of hype about the film and everything, but he was basically a giant iguana. I mean, they still kept the same kind of beginning. Okay, so basically he was a radiated iguana. Again, those nuclear bomb tests and whatnot, and one of those iguanas mutated into Godzilla, but he looked very different. He was more like an agile, Godzilla always had sort of a bulky kind of mass to him, big legs, big thighs, and and everything like that, slow and lumbering. But they made this one very athletic, like a lizard, ran on, he just one actually ran. He had a posture like a dinosaur, like Godzilla always stood straight up. This one they turned his pelvis up, so he was like more like a dinosaur, more so than a monster. But again, didn't do as well as the other ones. He didn't display a lot of the powers that he was known for. So again, when you talk about Godzilla, his powers, his big ability is certainly his radioactive breath. So again, he basically destroys anything that he throws it at. And in this one, they barely showed it. It was like it's kind of like he sort of breathed some fire or something like that, but it wasn't anything like the atomic breath that we're used to. So again, very disappointing in terms of what they delivered. He was also a lot more vulnerable, certainly in that film, and it was just a quirky rendition. And Toho actually regretted for a long time. They actually made fun of it in one of the next line of movies in the Millennium series that started in 1999 through 2004. 6 films were made in that time. They actually made fun of that incarnation of Godzilla in that time. That actually is here. This guy right here is the American version, but there was a somewhat of a benefit from it, because even though the film didn't do too well, there was actually a cartoon series that came out from that. And so it was like Godzilla the animated series came out, which was very popular. It was on Fox, and it was definitely something that allowed people to certainly partake in it. Now I'm getting some feedback from the back room in terms of dropping the link. Now, again, I'm not sure quite how to do this. I'm going to use my instincts here, and I'm going to drop this in the chat, and hopefully you guys will be able to now it says can't post messages to some channels. I don't know if that went it or not. If so I just put a link in the chat here, and if you guys can click on that and join the stream, certainly we would love to have you up, certainly in the stream. You certainly more than welcome to come in and join this conversation. Again, this is my first time hosting, and so I'm still learning the ropes a little bit. So hopefully, I'm doing a good job with that. But in any event, the animated series was very popular for its run. So even though the movie didn't do so well, the animated series did pretty well. So moving on, again, the Millennium series, which I must admit wasn't my favorite series for some reason. Again, certainly I didn't think they were as good as the Heisei series, but it was 6 different films. Again, they kind of resampled some of the same themes. They brought another Mecha Godzilla back. It's like in every generation there was like a Mecha Godzilla or something that they had to bring back. So I don't know if the so I don't know if they quite hit their point there. Again, none of them was necessarily based on a sequel to anything, but they were, certain, and that's this guy right here on my shoulder. That's one of the monsters, certainly from that branch of Godzilla films. But really, I have um, really not that much positive to say about the era. But it was, I wasn't crazy about the costumes or the models of that particular time, but it certainly in Japan it was popular. And I only remember I did go to the actual movie theater to see Godzilla Millennium or Godzilla 2000. That was actually released in the theaters, and I did actually go and see that one. And basically, it was like an English dub of the film. They didn't do any edits to the film or whatever. So I thought it was okay, but nothing really sold me on it. And that's the only one I remember that was actually released in American theaters, because again, the last time Godzilla was in a movie theater was back in 1985. So, I think, people were kind of anticipating, having it. Like I said, Godzilla's always had a fan base, always. And certainly people, you give enough time and distance or whatever, you put a Godzilla movie out, that it was always going to be well received. So the last era that we're in is the Reiwa series. All right, Reiwa. This is from 2016 to the present. Okay, 5 films were created. 3 of them actually were animated. All right. So the first film that came out was Shin Godzilla in 2016. And actually, again, I went to the theaters with a buddy of mine. The um, we actually watched the film, and we were able to, certainly we were able to, take it in. Very different Godzilla film. I would say, out of all the Godzilla films, this was probably the most unique in terms of the background story. Basically, in this one, Godzilla was essentially a creation from some uh, um, some ocean life forms, some lower life forms that kind of evolve. So this Godzilla was basically this Godzilla was basically a creature that had the ability to evolve based on its circumstances and situation. So when you first see it in the film, it's basically like a tadpole. Then it needs to learn how to walk, and it evolves legs, and then it evolves arms, and then it evolves an upright posture. So it kind of looks a lot like the um the character that we're used to seeing. But like I said, it's very different in terms of what we would think of Godzilla is kind of like, the looks hideous as a creature. I mean, it's unlike any incarnation of Godzilla that you've ever seen. It has this massive lower body. It has very small arms. It has this weird chest with this big horny breastplate that comes out of it. And again, it's always evolving. There's like 5 stages of the monster in the same film. So I talked about how the Godzilla costume changed over the course of movies. This Godzilla literally transformed over the course of the film, including its last form, where basically it had these sort of humanoid looking figures coming out of its tail. So again, very different take. My friend and I, when we saw it, we were kind of like, it certainly had an homage to, again, the original themes of this, again, nuclear waste, and evolving this creature over time. But it was definitely something that, it was, like I said, it was definitely different from what we were used to seeing. And so again, we were kind of scratching it. I've watched it several times, I think, since then, and I would honestly say that it's a little bit better. The more I've watched it, I've certainly, it's grown on me a little bit over time, but it's still a little bit off. It was a strange entry. So again, they put that on the shelf for some time. They actually came out with 3 animated films in that time period. So those 3 animated films was, I think, I got it here. Yeah, so it's Godzilla, Planet of the Monsters, Godzilla, City on the Edge of Battle, and Godzilla, World Eater. Again, these were animated films, and again, they had a different sort of take on Godzilla. It was the way it was shot, was very different, but essentially, Godzilla was some sort of living plant. Okay. So again, different background story. It was told like in a very futuristic world, where mankind was basically wiped out. I mean, it was very dystopian future. Didn't look good for humanity. Earth basically got taken over not only by Godzilla but by his influence. He kind of, all these other creatures evolved from him, and they were also these plant-based sort of beings. And again, a very different direction that they went in with those films. So again, from my watching, I wasn't necessarily the most enthralled by the product. Still had difficulty sort of understanding them a little bit. But then last year, earlier this year, they came out with Godzilla -1, which basically was a huge reset on the entire series that basically goes back to 1954 and has a fleshed out story, an origin story on Godzilla. But really, where it really shines is that it actually focuses on the human beings. Very similar to the first film. Yes, the first film had a lot of destruction and Godzilla going around, but a lot of it focused on the characters. But -1 really went in, and it was definitely something that, I think a lot of people really appreciated, um, regarding the franchise. So again, I definitely -1 is arguably the best Godzilla film ever made. I'll just put that down. As much as I had an affinity for the 1956 movie or the 54 original movie that started everything off, yes, it was very good. -1 was like, I remember when I got, when the movie was over, I got up and clapped. That's how that's how good I thought the movie was. It really did a lot as far as again, a reset. Now again, where they go from here, I don't know. One of the questions was, what is the future of the franchise? I don't know, because in addition to, you have this this series that we're in, this Reiwa season we're in, again, go back to America, you have another parallel track. Okay, so you have the legendary film series of Godzilla movies, which I must say they've done a fairly decent job with. Okay, so again, Legendary got the rights to do a Godzilla film. They came out in 2014. They came out with Godzilla. Again, a very good reboot, but again, a little bit of a different story. So in this story, Godzilla has always been around. He's an ancient alpha predator, okay, who, fed on nuclear energy that came from the core of the earth. He was always around. In fact, there were several of that species that were around during the time, but he was sort of awakened when people started doing nuclear bomb tests in the 50s. He's like, oh, I need a new energy source though. So basically, Godzilla kind of came out of hibernation or whatever, or saw what was going on, and say, hey, y'all got some of that good nuclear energy up there, let me get some of that. And so he's been around since the 50s. And so, you had, or the 40s. And so you had this organization, Monarch, that was tasked with the idea of tracking him and trying to understand him and whatnot. And actually, the nuclear bombs tests that they did in that time, they said they weren't tests, that they actually tried to kill Godzilla with those nuclear bombs. So the Bikini Atoll test, that was actually something where they actually tried to kill the monster, but because the monster fed on nuclear energy, it it didn't work. In fact, if anything, it made him stronger. It made him bigger. It made him more. And that background was actually captured in a recent series on Netflix. It's called Monarch. And in Martin, actually, I think I don't think it was Netflix. I think it was Apple TV actually, that had the series. Monarch dealt with telling the backstory of how they first encountered and all the things that were done to try to get rid of them and things of that nature. So it really kind of goes back in time and tells the history of the organization. But certainly out of that, then you had a movie about King Kong. So they had Kong Skull Island that came out to introduce it to that. And then over the pandemic, you actually had Godzilla versus Kong that came out. And again, I must say, again, very well done. All right. So again, certainly, all of us remember where we were during that time. Couldn't go out, not a lot of activities you could do. But again, certainly that was a nice addition. They didn't have a theater release until much later. But again, it came on HBO Max, and you certainly got a chance to see it. And I thought it was very well done. Again, that's probably definitely in my top 5 of Godzilla films of all time, right? And then, obviously they just had recently they had Godzilla X Kong, where again they kind of do the tag team thing again. So again, they have other antagonists, and so they have to do the tag team thing again in order to defeat the enemies and whatnot. So again, a little bit different in terms of, especially when you consider Godzilla minus one. So again, it's like you see that movie, and then like a couple weeks later or a month later, Godzilla X Kong comes out, and again, totally different film, totally different vibe and feel to it. Nevertheless, though, it was definitely, from what I understand, it did fairly well, at the box office and whatnot. I think the Legendary series, definitely has done overall with the, I think they've treated the character seriously, and they've taken fairly decent care of it, especially with the, like I said, with the Monarch series. They've done a lot of good things with it. Where they go from here, I have no idea. All right, in terms of where they go, but the Toho series, they have options. Because, like I said, one of the things about the Toho series is, like, never count him out, even though he allegedly gets killed off. But they leave you an Easter egg. Hey, he might not be quite down for the count yet. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But it was certainly a good start. And also, one of the main takeaways from the minus one, it actually won an Academy. First of all, it's the most successful Japanese released Godzilla film of all time. So again, the legendary series has made billions of dollars. It's been very successful marketing wise and financially. That doesn't mean that necessarily every movie was good, but it does very well financially, in that regard. But minus one actually won an Oscar Academy Award for best special effects. So again, a very good um, production. Shin Gojira also, that was one of the first movies that was done from the Japanese side that was totally a CGI character versus a guy in a suit. So in fact, the guy who was in the suit, I believe he had just actually passed the original actor who wore those suits, and that was a brutal ever because I mean you got a heavy suit on, and you got to breathe and whatnot, and so a lot of wear and tear on the body wearing that. And this actor did it for several decades actually. And but when they came out with Shingo Jira, they went away from the person in the costume, and they were able to do a lot more things sort of with that character. Hey Mariana, hey, good evening, good to see you tonight. Yes, like I said, the screen doesn't lie. I'm not grooming in reviews. And but again, I'm filling him in for him tonight. So again, the topic tonight we're talking about the Godzilla franchise, and certainly just sharing some insights, just bringing people up to date on the series. Again, I'm older than probably most of the people in this space, so certainly I go back in pretty far with a lot of the films, and so certainly I'm kind of giving a high level overview of the franchise overall, bringing us up to current days. So again, some of the questions that was asked or that I want to answer here. So, what are some of the major themes and messages conveyed through the Godzilla movies? Again, it's been several. It really depends on the time. It depends on the era. So, like I said, the earlier films, the '54 film, the sequel to that, which was Godzilla Raids again released in 1955. Um, um, certainly a lot of those films again dealt with the idea of again nuclear weapons and nuclear war and humanity basically doing too much. What did we release on the earth with the creation of atomic energy and nuclear energy? So those were things. But then other films dealt with other things. Corporate greed was another one. So Godzilla versus Mothra dealt a lot with corporate greed. Godzilla versus King Kong, King Kong versus Godzilla back then. Again, corporate greed. Once they started going into those films in the 70s, where again Godzilla was kind of like a kid's hero, they dealt with a lot of like one was like there was like Godzilla, was it All Out Attack? um Back then. Let me just make sure I get the name of the film right. So again, I think it was Godzilla All Out Attack. Basically, it dealt with bullying. He had this kid who had a vivid imagination, so he kind of fashioned and visualized himself with got the son of Godzilla. Again, it got silly in the 70s, but you had the son of Godzilla, and he would kind of go to him, and they were both kind of being bullied at the time. So they kind of did this parallel between son of Godzilla being bullied and this kid being bullied. And finally, at the end of the film, the bully, the kid fought back and stopped the bully. So I think in that time they were doing a lot of different messages, a lot of social conscious messages. Godzilla versus Hedorah, or Godzilla versus the smog monster, that was the title in the U.S. Dealt with pollution. Save the earth, stop pollution and whatnot. And again, Hedorah was created from again the pollution of the earth, and so they definitely again had some themes there, to support that. So again, changes with the time, changes with the theme. But again, once you started introducing other monsters, it was about other species, other aliens having malintent for the earth, and Godzilla kind of came up to save the day. So again, he's been all over the place in terms of how they've used the character again as an enemy, as a hero, as an anti-hero. A lot of times just leave me alone. But all kinds of different things that allowed them to make a film about it. And again, for the breath for 70 years, they've been able to sort of pull this off. But again, they have had to take breaks from time to time just to keep the series fresh and or to come up with new ideas. So again, which is my favorite Godzilla film and why? Um, like I just said earlier, I gotta say, just in terms of visceral reaction, just in terms of a great film, quality of film, it may I may have to say -1. The movie that just came out this year, very well done. In fact, I was with R. Payne. Actually, R. Payne, he's from New Jersey, so we actually had lunch today, and he said he just saw it also, and he talked about how great it was. So again, if you haven't seen -1, it is definitely worth seeing. Great acting, character-driven film. Uh, Terrible monster in terms of bringing back the terror of the monster. Um, Certainly, they did a lot of great things with that film. If you want to talk about Mount Rushmore of Godzilla films, I would have to say again Godzilla 1956. Okay, Godzilla King of the Monsters. Not that it's necessarily better than Godzilla 1954, but it's the most significant to me because again, that's the first Godzilla movie that I saw, and it for all intents and purposes, it was the original Godzilla film for decades for me until I actually watched the original one. So certainly it's going to hold a special place in my heart because of that. Again, Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. Again, the one from the 60s, very good. Godzilla versus Mothra, 1964, very good film. And if I was to add a fifth, so that's sort of my Mount Rushmore. But again, that 4 and 5 position can get swapped out at any time. Again, the 1989 Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, you could throw that one in there. You could throw that one in there as well. Um, Very good. And probably one movie. Now I talked about the Millennium series. There is one movie of note in that series that again takes a totally different direction from the other films in the series. So the name of the film is Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, John Masters All Out Attack. Now I know that's a long name for it. I don't know what the Japanese name is for it. That's the name that they had here for it. Okay. It was released in the theaters and it gave you a very different Godzilla. And the Godzilla was a terror. Cash Rain Mindset. Good evening. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. Appreciate you stopping through. A very different Godzilla. This Godzilla actually is this guy right in back of me. Okay. Notice that his eyes are white. Again, no other Godzilla incarnation had white eyes. He was almost like he was soulless. And what was unique about this Godzilla is that he actually killed people. Like, for real. Like it was like, people, the other films, I mean, you assume that people die because buildings get smashed and you assume that people are in the buildings or whatnot. They actually had scenes of this Godzilla actually taking people out. So they definitely in that film, they definitely made him the villain, had no heart for anybody, and his story a little bit different in that he basically is essentially the reincarnated souls of all those Japanese who died during World War II. And basically, he was, basically avenging those people on Japan because it was Japan that was responsible for putting them in that condition. So again, this version of Godzilla, again, very mean, soulless, killed with no hesitation, killed several monsters in the film also. Very different film. Hadn't seen something like that in some time, but certainly a very good film, and certainly it was. It definitely left you with definitely left you with an interpretation of Godzilla was, like I said, very different from things that you might have been used to. So that's kind of my hell level. But what about you guys? Are there any Godzilla fans? I mean, hardcore fans that are out there. If you are, drop in the chat. The live chat. What is your favorite Godzilla film? Or what era of Godzilla do you finally remember? What was the first time you remember seeing Godzilla? Was it in the 60s? Was it in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s? When did you become familiar with the character, or just with the entire kaiju time period or the genre? Because you've also had other title characters that have been created over time. One of the favorites of mine, again, growing up, again, similar arc, was Gamera. Right, I could, so again, Gamera had an arc, came out again as an antagonist, was a monster that was malevolent towards humanity. He too was awakened by a nuclear bomb that woke him out of hibernation, and he went out and did his thing. But again, as the series went on, they continued to bring him back, and he he became a again a friend of children. He would actually pick children up in his arm and put them back in the spaceships and flying them around, and things of that nature. So they even had a nice Gamera theme song, Gamera, Gamera. So they made him kind of silly too in that time. But then again, in the 80s, in the late 80s into the 90s, they brought that character back, and certainly made him, I guess, less childlike. In that vein, but certainly made him a lot more, certainly a lot more sort of like the anti-hero type of character. Certainly much improved special effects, and he was able to, so the one thing that has, that a lot of fans have always asked over the years, it's almost like Star Wars and Star Trek. Hang on a second, been talking here for a minute. So it's almost like Star Trek and a lot of people like both. Some people are Gamera fans, some people are Godzilla fans. And what's always been asked over time is, when will they ever make a crossover film? So this is like Marvel and DC. And there's rights, there's naming conventions and things like that. But certainly Gamera belongs to a different movie franchise. It's not a Toho monster. But certainly if you had, if there was enough money thrown around, what if they finally came out with a Gamera versus Godzilla movie? I think every fan, if you're a fan of the genre, that is something that you would certainly look forward to. But so far, you've had fan films that have been made about it. I know there's been some death battle episodes that I think they've done, Gamera versus Godzilla, who would win and things of that nature. But no one's come out with an actual series that I've seen. So again, one of the questions was, what what is the future? I can ask in terms of what I think is the what would be a good future for the series would be to introduce Gamera into into either the Toho universe or into the MonsterVerse, into the legendary MonsterVerse. You put Gamera in there, and you're gonna have something. All right. But I think like I said, the Legendary series overall, they've done a good job. They also did Godzilla King of the Monsters, where they introduced Ghidorah and Rodan. They kind of had that sort of all-star roster. They talk about the Titans, where you have all these monsters throughout the earth or whatnot, and how Godzilla is kind of like over them, and he kind of polices them and things of that nature. So again, somewhat of an anti-hero, but again, stuff gets messed up. So it's like, buildings get messed up and probably some casualties in there also. But it's like, hey, overall on the whole, he's kind of taking care of us. So we're gonna leave that alone. So again, hey, my man's this is one of my boys who certainly popped in. Again, this lifelong friend of mine, and we've followed Godzilla movies all over, and so it's definitely good to have him on tonight. Just him coming by to show support means a lot to me. Again, lifelong friend of mine, and he's dropping in. So EGN 2012, I know who you are. Again, good that you popped in tonight to check this out. And again, this is the hangout again. So every Saturday night, either myself and or grooming, we kind of pick a topic. Again, we've dealt with music eras, the 80s, the 90s, or the again, James Bond, superheroes, Star Wars versus Star Trek. Again, it's just a night where we just kind of pick topics to talk about, and just hang out. I mean, this God knows in this political season, everyone's talking about politics, and I'm almost to the point I'm sick of it right now. It's like we haven't even got to a debate yet. Everyone's talking about politics and whatnot. So this is just a where we can just kind of unwind a little bit, have some fun, relax and unwind from the toils of the day or the issues of the day or whatnot. So this is literally called a hangout where folks certainly are welcome to come. Again, the link, if anybody wants to cam up and join the conversation, again, like to know again, what are your favorite Godzilla films of all time? What was the first Godzilla movie you remember watching as a kid or as an adult? What are your favorite memories of that? Where would you like to see the series go? Certainly like to get your thoughts on that. Let me just go back to my list of questions here. So again, talked about my favorite Godzillas already. So again, there's a lot of them. That Mount Rushmore is pretty hard to fill, but certainly, like I said, Godzilla minus one, very much in that mix. I thought it was that good. And again, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you see it. And again, I didn't get a chance to see the black and white version of it, but I think that would certainly add another element that even takes you back even more so to the early film. So again, one of the questions: what are the differences between the Japanese and American adaptations of Godzilla? Again, different background story, and again, depending on your uh, I think it really depends on your taste, what you're used to. Like I said, this year we had two Godzilla films, very different tone. I think the approach, to Godzilla is a little bit different here than in other films because Godzilla minus one is character focused, meaning on the human beings in the film. They're telling the story through their eyes. The MonsterVerse Godzilla is focused on the monsters because the idea here in the US is like, hey, I don't want to hear a lot of dialogue and talk about stuff or whatever. I want to see more monster action. So again, if you talk about like they don't want a long sort of boring storyline or whatnot. They want to get into the action. They want to see monsters fighting. They want to see them doing monster things. But at the same time, you can certainly appreciate both. Now, I actually thought that the Godzilla X Kong movie, I thought in a way they were almost doing too much because you get all these monsters fighting and whatnot. It's like everything is done to like flash, flash, flash. It's like the movies are. It's like you almost have to slow the movie down to pick up on a lot of the action that's taking place. Now, Godzilla versus Kong. Now, again, I think they did that right. They set the right tone there, and even Godzilla King of the Monsters, I think, really did a nice job. So, if I had to rate the MonsterVerse movies, I would probably say Godzilla versus Kong, Godzilla King of the Monsters, the original Godzilla, the 2014, and then Godzilla X Kong, at least from what I've seen so far. And then if you want to throw Kong Skull Island in, again, there was no reference to Godzilla, but again, I thought it was I thought it was a pretty good setup film. So I think they did a good so far. They've done a decent job with it. It wasn't, great, but if it's constantly going to be, hey, show more monsters and less dialogue, that make it stale over time. So again, I think though, just given the success of these films, I think Godzilla X Kong did pretty well at the box office. I would expect that there's going to be another film. But again, where do you go? So far in the franchise, you've already introduced Rodan. You introduced King Ghidorah. You introduce Mecha Godzilla again, Godzilla versus Kong. Mecha Godzilla shows up again. Kong, of course. So where do you go from here? Who's left to and Mothra has also shown up. So you've had several of the famous Toho monsters have shown up, but again, who haven't we seen yet? And again, that would have to be Gamera. So if they can find some way, get those studios talking, because there hasn't been a Gamera movie in several years. So again, Gamera movie, I think they came out with like 4 or 5 Gamera movies starting in the late 90s, in the late 80s into the 90s. They had a string of Gamera films. Again, did pretty well at the box office, very successful. But we haven't really seen anything in that time since. So wouldn't it be interesting if they're able to come out with a Godzilla versus Gamera storyline? I think that would do a lot to certainly bring those universes together. I'm sure that the Gamera fan base will love to see another Gamera film. And so that's on my wish list, that before I leave this earth, they'll come out with a Godzilla versus Gamera movie. And then that I think that would be, I think that would definitely be something that that they can do. And again, Gamera has a similar arc. There've been a ton of Gamera films released in the '60s and then the '70s. Again, sort of very similar story arc, but I would say in terms of popularity, he's still like it's like the Yankees and the Mets. No offense to the Mets fans, but certainly the New York Yankees certainly have a much more character. A lot more championships, uh, a lot more things going on, and certainly, but I again, I love the Gamera franchise as well. I'm not hating on it, but I think that would certainly do a lot to bring a lot of fan bases back to bring a lot of fan bases back together, and to see that you know to see if they can pull that off. But yeah, I mean, it's been it's each one has its merits. But again, as far as the differences between the two, I would say the American movie franchise definitely focused on the action, less dialogue. The Japanese movies, especially Shin Godzilla, and Godzilla minus one, very much on the human characters and the human story, and they really pull you in with that. Um, Last couple questions here, and again, folks want to come on, you guys can certainly come up and again follow along. If not, I may call the stream early tonight because again, unlike Peter, I can, I like to make my points, and then I like to kind of, to get out. So I may end the stream certainly a little bit early tonight. But hopefully, I don't know if Peter's en route. Maybe he can even stop through tonight. But again, anyone's free to certainly stop by and say hello. Um, how do the special effects in older Godzilla movies compare to those in modern times? Again, it's obviously they used a lot of model work. A lot of buildings were like 3 feet tall or whatever, and Godzilla's kind of trampling over them, and the jet fighters, or you could tell they're sort of on wires and things of that nature. So again, in a lot of ways, those older films, it's almost like wrestling, right? Professional wrestling. You have to suspend some belief if you truly want to enjoy it. If you pick on every single special effect or whatnot, then you're not going to have a lot of fun with it. So yeah, so the films today, lots of CGI. Like I said, all the films now they're doing it with CGI. No one's in the man suit anymore. They're doing a lot of so definitely having the characters move with more animalistic intent, more emotion in the face and whatnot, more like just watching a little animal on the screen. They're definitely getting better at doing that. But having said that, some of the acting isn't that great. So like I said, the American franchises, especially the '98 series, I thought it was the dialogue was pretty it was pretty slapstick back then. So it really wasn't that good to watch or to follow back then. But I thought but I thought that the Japanese versions, I think they take the craft of acting, I think, a little bit more seriously that they do in the Americas. But special effects wise, there's really not a lot of comparison. Although it's certainly ones like Godzilla versus Mothra, as I said earlier, even the King of the Monsters version, even though the suit is more crude, and there's definitely an actor in the suit, and there's puppet work and things like that you see, even though that stuff is there, again, just the movie. Also, I think the soundtrack. So again, there's famous music from the franchise that has been used over and over again. The Godzilla March, you know, dun 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 dun, or the Godzilla March, dun 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 dun. So I think you certainly those themes have been used over and over again in the franchise, and that also helps with some of the continuity, also to keeping it together. So again, the composer of all that music, I think is certainly has helped to kind of keep everything together over the course of the films as well. But special effects wise, yeah, I mean clearly the modern day films are superior. Um, Again, I think I answered this question already. What role does Godzilla play in the MonsterVerse, and how does it connect? And how does it connect to other legendary monsters? So again, in the MonsterVerse, again, Godzilla is essentially a protector of the earth, particularly against the other monsters in that MonsterVerse. So again, in that MonsterVerse, they're called Titans, and again these are ancient beings that go back many years, and so he kind of, when those titans act up, he kind of acts at that time, or if man acts up, he kind of schools man at some point in time. So in Godzilla versus Kong, when he found out that they were creating like a mecha kind of figure, he kind of takes action, and folks get hurt. So, so he's not afraid to come up against human beings. He's not afraid to come out against other monsters, but he's basically there to sort of keep the order of things. And so again, he has a role there, but again, he doesn't spare. It's not like he sees a kid, he's just gonna go past the kid. He'll, if you're in his way, he'll sort of just take you out. So the world in the Legendary series, they kind of just say, hey, you know what? Let him do what he wants to do. We'll figure out stuff later on. But look, he's protecting us against the big bad guys or whatever. But hey, if a city has to be chomped up in the process, hey, rather better that than the world. And so that's where he makes his certainly makes his bones. And the last question again, what do you think the future holds? Again, I think I talked about that. I think certainly with the Godzilla -1 in Japan, I think they can go in a lot of different directions with that. Now, whether or not they want to introduce some classic characters or another type of character, or to make Godzilla into an antagonist, again, they kind of left you at the end of the movie thinking, okay, he may not still be dead yet, and that they may have to deal with him again. How they want to treat that? Do they want to kind of rehash old characters or go in a totally different direction? We have to see. But certainly, the success of the film almost guarantees that there'll be another one, both in the U.S. as well as in Japan. And as far as the Legendary series, again, they may have taken that as far as they can go. But again, if they can introduce Gamera, and I think just with the appeal, I think they can certainly pull that character into the MonsterVerse, and that could be interesting. Depending on how they treat that, they may even want to do a Gamera film just to introduce, just like they did with Kong Skull Island. Do a Gamera film, an independent Gamera film that maybe has then those two meeting at some point in the future. But it would be interesting in terms of what they're able to do. But yeah, so again, 70 years of Godzilla. And I challenge anybody to go back and look at a franchise that's had, 37, 38 films over time, animated series and animated movies, and like I said, action figures, and comic books, all kinds of spin-offs, books, novelizations, you name it. Pretty much every ground has been covered with the Godzilla brand, whether it be in America or in Japan. So you have a lot to certainly to choose from. Again, I admit it, you're probably not going to like everything. Like I said, especially those films in the mid to late 70s weren't necessarily the best. Very kind of childish in terms of the themes and the action and whatnot. You may not appreciate that as being an adult person, but nevertheless, though, it is there's some gems in there, and I think if you watch some of the gems that I talked about, Again, if you're gonna watch your first Godzilla film, either watch the first one or the American adaptation of the first one, or watch minus one, and that will definitely or watch the original. I mean, if you want to watch the original 2014 legendary monsterverse one, I thought that was a pretty good entry also in terms, and it, like anything else, that's the one that sets up the other ones, right? Just like we saw with the 98 film. If that film bombs, you're not going to get a chance to redo that. So I got to say kudos to the 2014 version of Godzilla, because that gave the impetus to create more films, and some of them got better. The last one maybe not as much in my opinion, but certainly, the nailing the first one is the most important. So again, so we're going on 10:45. And again, I'll stay on, I guess, for a little while longer. I'll maybe spend a little bit more certainly on this. But like I said, I don't have my man Pete, my man Grooming's gift of gab, so to speak. I'll answer a question, but certainly he has the gab. So I'll stay on for a couple more minutes. And if folks, if you have questions, you can certainly drop your questions in the chat, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. Or, certainly if you want to join, again, the link is in the chat, and certainly you can join on before the program ends. But again, I want to thank Grooming and Reviews for giving me this opportunity and platform. Again, if you're looking at the bottom of the screen, you'll see his Cash App scrolling by, so you can certainly go there and check it out. Also, click the like button. At the very least, you can do that. Click the like button, and certainly that helps him. It helps the algorithm, and that people can find this to find this content. But certainly, and just as a programming note, tomorrow evening on the Black Man Unfiltered Network, as well as on this network for Grooming and Reviews, we have our Gray Area show, and I'm trying to remember what we're talking about tomorrow night. But that's certainly a privilege to certainly team up with Grooming on that, as we talk about all kinds of topics and issues. We talk about everything from toys to marriage to guns to whatever, you name it. We just pick a topic coming from the perspective of an African American man, an ADOS man, and a Greek American man, and just trying to find that common ground. And certainly last week's show, when we had Peter's good friend who was on with us, CQ, again, Army veteran, went through a lot, overcame a lot, certainly in battle, and certainly made the best out of a bad situation, and it continues to inspire others, other soldiers, other men, certainly through the Wounded Warriors Project, certainly helping others to overcome their issues. So again, finding purpose after you realize that you can't certainly go back into the military. Great life story. Talked about how he found his wife, and just how they've been able to overcome just all those obstacles. And so he's definitely an inspiration. So, and certainly enjoyed the conversation, and looking forward to other conversations that we can have with others. Again, we provide a safe place for people to have conversation and dialogue, and not be judged, or I mean, these days, there's a lot of hostility going on out there in these YouTube streets. But we like to have a safe place and platform for people to share their stories, that we can actually learn and listen, and again, try to find the common ground, try to find the gray area that keeps us united. And that if people can learn from our conversations in terms of how to have good and proper conversation without getting so emotionally involved or attached or feeling offended, certainly, I think we'll all be better off. So again, the gray area, again, tomorrow night, tomorrow night, 9:30 on the Black Man Unfiltered Network, as well as on the Grooming and Reviews 101 channel. They'll both be streamed. And so whatever platform that you go on both platforms, like hit the like button on both platforms. Helps everybody out at that particular point in time. But with that, again, I've enjoyed giving this sort of retrospective on the Godzilla series and on the franchise. And certainly, like I said, it's even at my age now, I'm still a fan. I still look forward to the movies that are coming out. I think both Toho and Legendary are coming out with fine entries. Um, and again, the finest entry might have been the last movie, certainly on the Toho side. The Godzilla, the Legendary series, they may have a little bit more work to do as far as trying to find where can we be original. But I hope they're able to land it, because I think I think there's more to offer out there, and so certainly Godzilla is going to be with us for a while on both sides of the world, and certainly those of us who are fans can see it. But I would say again, in closing, about again the Godzilla versus the Godzilla -1 movie. You do not have to be a Godzilla fan to enjoy the movie. That is how good it was. Godzilla was almost an afterthought in the film. He's very present in the film. But again, you don't have to be a fan to enjoy it. It was that good. So again, but with that, I'm going to say again, thank you once again to Grooming and Reviews 101, the Ghost of Sparta, a.k.a. Peter, a.k.a. Paniotis. I'll see you tomorrow night on our next edition of The Gray Area, and I'm sure he'll give you an update on upcoming shows that will be coming up on the channel. But I appreciate your time tonight, and the only thing I would say is again, I appreciate this platform, and I appreciate the friendship that I've formed with Grooming, and certainly looking forward to bigger and better things certainly for this channel and beyond. So again, for everybody, again, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Hopefully we'll see some of you guys tomorrow night, and you guys take care. Have a great night. Take